I was born in the Visota chambers of House Stellarum, 17 levels above the ship decks, where the void blind labored. The air there carried the scent of imported incense, something called amber lotus, brought from a garden world I would never see. My first memory is of that smell mixing with the metallic tang of the brass fixtures that lined every corridor. Temperature held constant at 18.3 degrees Celsius. Optimal for Navigator physiology, I was told later. I was the 7th child, the lucky number. They had hopes for me. My mother's name was Celestine Stellarum, primary navigator of the House Fleet's flagship, Inheritance of Stars. She piloted 17 successful warp transits before I was born, each one archived in the House records with a genetic code attached. Success rate, 94.6%. Better than the House average. My father I knew only as a designation, tertiary gene bearer, Delta classification, approved for controlled reproduction. I saw him twice in my childhood. Both times he wore the formal robes that concealed his mutations. Both times he looked at me with something I could not then identify. I understand now it was assessment, calculation, measuring my value against my cost. The third eye opens at puberty in Navigator bloodlines. Some manifest earlier, prodigies who require immediate binding and training. Some later, forcing the House to wait with mounting anxiety as genetic investments approach adulthood without showing returns. The House maintained detailed records. Average manifestation age, 11.7 standard years. Acceptable variance, 8 to 14 years. Beyond 14, probability of manifestation dropped to 12%. Beyond 16, to less than 3. I was 5 years old when they first tested me. The examination chamber was kept deliberately dark. 21.4 lux, measured by the scanning equipment to encourage any nascent warp sensitivity to surface. They placed me in the observation throne, a scaled-down version of the navigator's throne that dominated the ship's sanctum. The leather was cold against my child's legs. They secured the restraints gently. That gentleness would not last in later examinations. "Look into the void," the examiner said. His name was Secundus Holt, House Gene Evaluator, 43 years of service. I remember his voice carried no warmth, but no cruelty either. Professional assessment, clinical observation. Tell us what you perceive. I looked. I saw darkness. Stars beyond the viewport, distant and cold. The familiar constellations of the Stellarum home system, positioned exactly as they appeared to baseline human eyes. I told him this. He made notations on his data slate. The scratching sound of stylus on parchment screen filled the silence. Any sensation of depth, of layers beneath the visible? I tried. I wanted to tell him yes. Even at 5 years old, I understood that yes was the answer they required. But I had been raised in a house where precision mattered, where a navigator's miscalculation meant ships lost in the warp, crews devoured, cargo destroyed, house reputation diminished. Truth was survival. I told him no. More notations. A longer pause. "We will test again at 7 years," he said. They did. Same chamber, same darkness, same questions. My legs reached the restraints more easily. I had grown. The results had not changed. Darkness was darkness. Stars were stars. The void showed me nothing my baseline eyes could not perceive. At 9 years, they brought in a sanctioned psyker, not a navigator, but a telepath from the Scholastica Psychana, borrowed at considerable expense. She wore the collar that marked her rating, Theta class, acceptable risk threshold. She placed her augmented hands on my temples. The metal was warm from her body heat. She smelled of ozone and the particular sterile scent of psychic suppression drugs. "Open," she commanded. I felt her consciousness brush against mine. Not invasive. She had been paid to evaluate, not to harm house property, but thorough. She withdrew after 17 minutes. I know the duration because I counted my heartbeats, a habit I had developed during the examinations. 943 beats. Elevated from baseline due to stress response. The boy possesses no measurable psychic aperture, she reported. Warp blind, grade negative null. The house matriarch attended that examination personally. My grandmother, Navigatus Prime Astoria Stellarum, 318 years old, her third eye covered by the traditional silk binding when not in use. She had piloted house ships through the Gothic War, through the Sabbat World's Crusade, through 17 major warp storms. Her genetic legacy had produced 47 viable navigators across 4 generations. 93.2% manifestation rate among her direct descendants. I represented failure in that pattern. Continue monitoring, she said. Some bloodlines manifest late. I was 11 when my sister Meridian's third eye opened. She was 9 years old. Precocious manifestation. I was present when it happened. We were in the house Scholarium, receiving instruction in warp theory and imperial astronomy. The tutor was explaining the nature of the Empyrean when Meridian gasped. Her hands flew to her forehead. The tutor recognized the signs immediately. He had seen it 42 times in his career with House Stellarum. Medical staff to Scholarium 7, he said into the vox bead. His voice stayed calm. Routine procedure. Manifestation in progress. The flesh of her forehead split vertically, a precise line exactly 3.2 centimeters in length. The opening was genetic, biological, natural, yet it appeared as though her skull had simply decided to provide a window. I watched. I could not look away. The eye beneath was nothing like our other eyes. It was opalescent, shot through with colors that should not exist in real space. It wept fluid that was not quite tears, more viscous, faintly luminous. She was screaming. They had warned us it would hurt. The pain of manifestation rated between 7 and 9 on the Imperial Standard Pain Index, equivalent to severe burning or limb severance. It lasted between 4 and 40 minutes depending on the strength of the manifestation. Meridians lasted 11 minutes. I timed it. 660 heartbeats. The medical staff arrived and administered the sedatives, the genetic stabilizers, the psychic dampeners that would help her learn control. They wrapped her forehead in the sacred silks. They carried her to the manifestation ward, where she would spend the next 6 weeks learning to close the eye, to control her perception, to survive what she had become. The tutor looked at me after they had taken her away. I was still standing exactly where I had been. I had not moved during her manifestation. I had not offered comfort. What comfort could I offer? I had not called for help. Help was already protocol. I had simply witnessed and recorded, as I was learning to do with all things I could not change. Your time will come, he said. He believed it. I could hear the certainty in his voice. House Stellarum had a 93.2% manifestation rate. My mother was a successful navigator. My genetic codes had been analyzed and approved before my conception. Mathematical probability favored manifestation. I was 12 when they tested me again. 13, 14. The examinations grew longer, more invasive. They administered genetic stimulants meant to trigger latent navigator genes. They exposed me to mild warp current fluctuations under controlled conditions, monitored by 3 separate navigator overseers in case I manifested suddenly and catastrophically. They brought in gene priests from the Adeptus Mechanicus to analyze my DNA at the molecular level, searching for the aberrations that would indicate navigator potential. Every test returned the same result. Negative. Null. Warp blind. I was 15 years old when they performed the final confirmation. The procedure required a deep-level psychic scan, dangerous and expensive. They would not have authorized it if I had not been direct genetic descendant of the Navigator's Prime herself. The psyker they brought was Alpha class, powerful enough to see the underlying structure of my consciousness to map the places where psychic potential should reside. I remember his name. Interrogator Vale. He wore the seal of the Inquisition, not assigned to judge me, but powerful enough that only the Inquisition could safely employ a psyker of his capability. He was accompanied by 2 Tempestus scions with psych-out grenades, standard precaution. If he became possessed during the deep scan, they would kill us both. The scan lasted 43 minutes. I remained conscious throughout. He had warned me I would experience his presence as intrusion, violation, exposure. He had not lied. It felt as though someone was rifling through drawers of my mind, examining contents, discarding what did not serve his purpose. I tasted copper, smelled burning parchment, heard my mother's voice speaking in languages I did not know. Hallucination? I understood later. Psychological side effects of deep psychic examination. When he withdrew, I vomited. Autonomic response. The medical staff had placed receptacles nearby. They had expected this. Interrogator Vale removed his psychic hood. His face was gray with exhaustion. Alpha-class scans cost years of life expectancy. He had sacrificed hours of his remaining existence to examine me. The subject possesses no psychic architecture, he reported. No aperture, no potential, no latency. The Navigator genes are present in his cellular structure but remain completely dormant, non-expressive. He will never manifest. Certainty rating 90 to 9.8%. The remaining 0.2% was the margin of error that existed in all human endeavor. The statistical acknowledgement that the universe sometimes defied analysis. The house matriarch received the report in silence. I stood before her in the judgment chamber where navigators of House Stellarum had made decisions for 4,000 years. The walls were lined with portraits of successful ancestors. Their third eyes depicted open and glorious in the artwork. I counted 63 portraits. I would never join them. You carry Navigator genes, she said finally. Recessive, but viable. You cannot be permitted to marry outside the house. Your genetic material is house property, potentially valuable in future breeding programs should the recessive genes combine successfully with a partner's active Navigator heritage. I understood. I was not being exiled. Exile would have been mercy. You cannot work outside householdings. Too much risk of genetic material being compromised, stolen, or improperly utilized. You represent genetic investment. You will be retained. I was 15 years old. The average human lifespan in the Imperium ranged from 30 to 45 years depending on world classification and occupation. Navigators, with their genetic augmentation and access to juvenate treatments, lived between 150 and 300 years. I carried Navigator genes. I would receive the juvenate treatments. Genetic investment must be maintained in optimal condition. I would live for centuries. You will serve House Stellarum in administrative capacity. We have need of those who understand Navigator culture, but can interface with baseline humanity. You will manage logistics, coordinate with Imperial authorities, handle contracts and negotiations. You will be useful, not valued, not honored. Useful. Do you understand your position? I understood. I was a tool that had failed quality assessment, but retained some salvageable function. I would not be discarded entirely, but I would never be what I was created to be. Yes, Navigators Prime, I said. You will be assigned quarters in the administrative wing. Level 8. You will begin training in house management procedures immediately. Dismissed. Level 8 was 23 levels below the Vasota chambers where I had been born. The air there carried no scent of amber lotus. Temperature fluctuated between 16 and 21 degrees Celsius, depending on the efficiency of the environmental systems. The quarters measured 4.2 meters by 3.7 meters, acceptable by Imperial standards. Generous, even, compared to the hab blocks where billions lived in conditions I had only read about. I had lived in chambers that spanned 40 meters, where the ceilings soared high enough that they vanished into shadow. Where my window overlooked the private house gardens where gene-approved Navigator children played under supervision. My new window overlooked a cargo processing yard. I was 17 when Meridian completed her Navigator training. The ceremony was held in the house sanctum, attended by all current Navigators and approved genetic descendants. I attended because I was still, technically, approved genetic descendant. My genes were house property. My presence was required. She wore the formal robes of a confirmed Navigator, black and silver House Stellarum colors. The silk binding across her forehead was new, embroidered with her name and confirmation date in thread of gold. She had survived the training. 47% of manifested navigators died during training, lost in warp currents during practice sessions, driven mad by uncontrolled perception, consumed by entities that noticed their nascent talent. She had survived. She had succeeded. The Navigator's Prime performed the confirmation ritual. Ancient words in a language that predated Old Night, she anointed Meridian with oils blessed by the Paternoval envoy himself. She placed upon Meridian's hands the silver rings that marked a confirmed navigator of House Stellarum. "You will guide ships through darkness," the Navigator's Prime intoned. "You will see what must not be seen, know what must not be known, and bring humanity safely through the hell of the Empyrean. You are Navigator. You are House Stellarum. You are invaluable." The assembled navigators responded in unison. "Guide us through darkness." I stood in the back of the sanctum among the administrative staff and genetic evaluators. We were permitted to witness, but we did not respond. The words were not for us. After the ceremony, there was a celebration. Meridian was now eligible for assignment to actual voyages. She would begin with short warp jumps under the supervision of senior navigators. If she performed adequately, she would eventually pilot ships independently. She would add her genetic code to the house success records. She would marry another approved navigator from an allied house, producing children who would carry the gift forward. She saw me in the crowd. Our eyes met. For a moment, I thought she might approach me. We had been raised together, after all. We had shared tutors, shared lessons, shared the same Hokmut chambers until her manifestation separated us. She looked away, deliberate. Conscious choice, not cruelty, simple recognition of reality. I existed in a different category now. Social interaction with genetic dead ends served no purpose. It might even constitute waste of her valuable time. I left the celebration early. No one noticed. I was 19 years old when I processed my first ship contract. The work was complex but not difficult. House Stellarum provided navigator services to Imperial Navy vessels, rogue trader dynasties, Mechanicus explorator fleets, and occasionally inquisitorial ships when the request came with appropriate authorization. Each contract required negotiation of terms, establishment of payment schedules, assignment of appropriate navigator skill level to journey difficulty, liability assessment, and coordination with house logistics. I demonstrated aptitude. The work suited the particular qualities my training had developed: precision, attention to pattern, ability to process large amounts of data without emotional interference. I had spent years watching, analyzing, understanding that my observations would never matter in the ways that mattered to House Stellarum. I had learned to find meaning in accuracy itself. Within 2 years, I was managing the contracts for 17% of House Stellarum's active navigator assignments. Within 5 years, 31%. The work expanded to fill the time I possessed, which was all time. I had no other function. I was 23 when I met Navigatus Cale Stellarum. He was my age precisely. We had been born in the same house medical facility, 3 weeks apart. I remembered him vaguely from childhood. He had manifested at 12 years old. Moderate manifestation, normal development. He completed navigator training with acceptable marks. Not exceptional, but competent. 73rd percentile among his training cohort. He came to my office to discuss a contract dispute. The rogue trader who had hired him claimed the warp transit had taken longer than agreed, demanded payment reduction. Standard negotiation tactic. Most rogue traders attempted this at least once. I had developed efficient protocols for resolution. The transit duration was within acceptable variance, I explained, displaying the data on the hololith projector. Warp current fluctuations added 4.3 days to the journey. Weather phenomena, unavoidable. The contract specifies House Stellarum is not liable for duration variance below 7 days. You fulfilled your obligation. The rogue trader will pay full contract price. He studied the data. You're certain rogue trader Vess is persuasive, and he has connections to 3 other potential clients. Certainty rating 97.4%. The contract language is explicit. If he refuses payment, House Stellarum legal proxies will pursue collection through administratum commercial courts. Expected resolution time, 14 months. Expected recovery rate, 82% of contracted sum plus legal fees. You've calculated all this already. Standard protocol. I calculate probable outcomes for all disputed contracts upon receiving notification. He looked at me with something I had not seen directed toward me in years. Interest, not social interest, professional recognition. You're efficient. Efficiency is my function. Most contract administrators require 3 days to assemble this analysis. You had it ready when I arrived. I received notification of the dispute 4 hours ago. The analysis required 90 minutes. I spent the remaining time reviewing precedent cases. He smiled. Small expression, barely visible. Wasted time then. It was a joke, gentle humor. I had not experienced that in professional context before. Administrative staff did not joke with navigators. The distance between us was too vast. Not wasted, I said. The precedent review identified 3 cases with useful parallel arguments. If rogue trader Vess escalates to formal dispute, these precedents will support House position. Of course they will. He deactivated the holothith. Thank you. I'll inform Vess of his options. I expect he'll pay rather than face legal process. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. You're Celestine's son, the 7th child. Yes. I remember you from before training. You were always watching, analyzing everything. Observation was my primary skill. Still is, apparently. He left. I sat in my office after he departed and felt something I had not felt in years. Recognition, not of my value. I knew my value in concrete terms, measured in contracts processed and efficiency ratings. Recognition of my continued existence as something more than function. It lasted approximately 4 minutes. Then I returned to work. I saw Kale occasionally over the following years. House Stellarum maintained 17 active navigators at any given time, some always in transit, some in training, some resting between assignments. Kale fell into steady rotation. He was reliable. Not the most talented navigator in the house, but consistent, 73rd percentile, acceptable. He came to my office when he returned from voyages, initially for legitimate reasons, contract confirmations, payment verifications, scheduling of next assignments, later for reasons that were less clearly necessary. He would ask questions about upcoming routes. I would provide data on warp current predictions, reported phenomena along planned trajectories, historical transit times for comparable journeys. You know more about the routes than some navigators, he observed once. I process all voyage reports. Pattern recognition develops naturally. You could have been a navigator yourself if, he stopped, if I had manifested, if my genes had expressed, if I had become what I was designed to be. I could not have been, I said. The capacity did not exist. I'm sorry. I looked at him. Kale was 29 years old. He had piloted 47 successful warp transits, 0 losses. His genetic code was flagged as viable for reproduction. The House had begun discussing marriage contracts with allied navigator families. He represented success, value, future. He had no reason to apologize to me. Why? I asked. Because you understand what we do better than most navigators I've served with, and you'll never experience it. That seems, he searched for words, unjust. Justice was not a concept I had considered relevant to my situation for 14 years. Justice implied there was a standard against which circumstances could be measured and found inadequate. But I had not been wronged. I had simply failed to manifest. Biology was not just or unjust. It simply was. I am useful, I said. That is sufficient. He looked at me for a long moment. Something in his expression suggested he wanted to argue. He did not. "I'll see you when I return from the Calixis run." He left. The Calixis run was considered moderate difficulty. 17 days estimated transit time. Warp currents in that sector were relatively stable. Navigator casualty rate for that route, 4.1% annually. Acceptable risk. Kale returned 19 days later, within acceptable variance. Successful transit. I processed his completion paperwork and scheduled his mandatory rest period. 6 weeks minimum between transits of that duration. House regulation designed to prevent warp exposure degradation. He came to my office on the 3rd day of his rest period. "I brought you something," he said. He placed a small object on my desk. A data crystal, standard imperial format. Unremarkable. "What is this?" Recording from the observation deck. "From the warp transit. I thought you might want to see it." I understood immediately what he was offering. Visual record of the Empyrean. What navigators saw when they opened their third eye and gazed into the hell that lay between stars. What I would never witness firsthand. "Why would you record this?" "Because you asked once, years ago, during training orientation. You asked what it looked like. The navigator instructor told you it was beyond description, beyond mortal comprehension." He tapped the crystal. "That was partially true, but we do record sometimes. For training purposes. For proof of phenomena. I recorded this for you. Personal gesture. Unnecessary expenditure of thought and effort. No one had given me anything personal in 14 years. "Thank you," I said. "Watch it when you're alone. It can be overwhelming, even second-hand." He left. I waited until my shift ended, returned to my quarters on level 8, locked the door, inserted the crystal into my personal data slate, activated playback. The recording showed the view from a ship's observation deck during warp transit. I had read descriptions. I had studied theoretical models. I had analyzed thousands of navigator reports describing warp phenomena in technical terminology. None of it had prepared me. The immaterium was not darkness. It was color that should not exist, geometry that violated physical law, space that folded and unfolded according to principles that mocked reason. I saw things moving in the depths, entities, presences, consciousnesses vast and hungry. I saw ships lost in the currents, ancient hulks crewed by the damned. I saw faces in the roiling madness, some screaming, some laughing, some simply watching with eyes that contained eternities of suffering. The recording lasted 9 minutes and 43 seconds. I watched it 7 times. I understood then what I had been denied. Not just function, I had function. Not just purpose, I served purpose. What I had been denied was wonder, terror, the awful magnificence that existed beyond the veil of real space. I would spend centuries managing the logistics of those who witnessed this. I would process their contracts, coordinate their schedules, ensure they had everything required to perform their function. I would never see it with my own eyes. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my quarters and calculated. If I lived 200 years, conservative estimate for a navigator-descended individual with access to juvenat treatments, and continued my current workload, I would process approximately 47,000 individual contracts. I would coordinate the movements of navigators who would collectively pilot 116,000 warp transits. I would enable the transport of trillions of tons of cargo, millions of personnel, thousands of critical military assets. My work mattered. In aggregate, in accumulated impact, my function was genuinely valuable, and none of it would ever be mine. I was 31 years old when House Stellarum received the inquisitorial contract. The request came through channels that bypassed standard commercial negotiation, sealed orders bearing the authority of the Ordo Xenos, priority classification absolute. The Inquisitor required navigator services for an extended explorator mission into the Ghoul stars. Estimated duration, 2 years. Estimated risk, severe. The Ghoul stars carried a casualty rate of 47.3% for navigator transits. The warp there was turbulent, unstable, haunted by phenomena that had consumed entire expeditions. Only the most experienced navigators were qualified for such assignments. The contract specified requirements: navigator with minimum 15 years active service, demonstrated stability in high-stress environments, proven capacity to maintain focus during extended exposure to warp turbulence. Psychological evaluation rating: epsilon grade or higher. Cale met every qualification. He came to my office when the house matriarch assigned him to the contract. I had already prepared the documentation. Standard protocol, though I had taken unusual care with the details. I knew what this assignment meant. 2 years, he said. He did not sit. He stood before my desk holding the contract slate I had prepared. The longest anyone from our house has spent on continuous deep-range patrol was 9 months. Navigator's Prime Astoria herself. She returned, diminished. I had studied that case. Astoria Stellarum had completed the mission successfully, but the psychological evaluation afterward showed measurable degradation, increased response time to stimuli, occasional perceptual distortions even outside the warp, minor cognitive impairment. The damage was manageable, treatable with extended rest and monitored recovery, but it was damage. The Inquisitor offered hazard compensation at 400% standard rate, I said. The House Matriarch accepted. Your assignment is confirmed. I could refuse. Navigators have right of refusal for contracts rated above 40% casualty threshold. This was true. House law recognized that navigators were too valuable to expend carelessly. Suicide missions could be declined without penalty. You could refuse, I agreed. The contract would be offered to Navigator Sarah. She is second qualified for the requirements. Her psychological evaluation is Delta grade, lower than yours. Her probability of successful completion is 31.8%. Yours is 44.2%. He looked at me. You calculated our comparative survival rates. I calculate all relevant data for high-risk contracts. Standard protocol. If I refuse, Sarah probably dies. Probability rating 71.4%, accounting for all documented Ghoul Stars phenomena and her specific psychological profile. And if I accept, probability rating 55.8%. He was silent for 37 seconds. I counted. Those are not favorable odds, he said finally. No. You would recommend I refuse. It was not a question, but I answered as though it were. I am contract administrator. I do not provide strategic recommendations to navigators. That exceeds my function. If you did provide recommendations, hypothetically, I looked at the data displayed on my cogitator screen. Cale's service record: 47 successful transits, 0 losses. Psychological evaluation, epsilon grade, exceptional stability. Age, 31 years. Genetic code, flagged for reproduction, 3 marriage contracts under negotiation with allied houses. Value to House Stellarum, immeasurable in strict terms, but quantifiable as approximately 4.7 million Throne-Gelt in training investment, plus projected lifetime contribution of 68,000 successful transits, over estimated career span of 119 years. Hypothetically, I said, survival probability below 50% constitutes unacceptable risk for an asset of your value. Refusal would be logical. Sarah's loss would be regrettable but acceptable, given her lower long-term value projection. That's a cold calculation. It is accurate calculation. He set down the contract slate. What's my value if I refuse an assignment that I'm most qualified for, knowing someone less qualified will die in my place? This was not a question I could answer with data. This was philosophy. Ethics. Concepts I had relegated to background process years ago because they served no function in my daily existence. I cannot quantify that, I said. No, you can't. He picked up the slate again. I'll accept the contract. Prepare the final documentation. I will coordinate departure logistics. The Inquisitor's vessel departs in 11 days. You should begin warp exposure preparation protocols immediately. I apologize for the unnecessary statement. He moved toward the door, then stopped. This was becoming a pattern with him. Hesitation at departure, as though there were additional words that required speaking, but could not be properly formulated. "Will you be here when I return?" he asked. "I will be here. I am always here. 2 years is a long time. I am aware of standard temporal measurements. That's not what I—" He stopped himself. "Never mind. I'll see you when I return, probability permitting." He left. I sat in my office and stared at the probability calculations still displayed on my cogitator. 44.2% survival rate. I adjusted variables, testing different scenarios. If the Inquisitor's ship encountered only moderate warp phenomena, 61.3%. If they encountered severe but not catastrophic conditions, 49.7%. If they encountered entity-level threats, 23.1%. The data was insufficient. Too many unknown variables. The ghoul stars had consumed expeditions without leaving enough evidence to determine what had killed them. Some threats could not be predicted because they had never been survived. I worked through the night preparing Kale's departure documentation with more thoroughness than protocol required. I compiled detailed reports on every recorded Ghoul Stars expedition from the past century. I analyzed survival patterns, identifying factors that correlated with successful return. Navigator psychological resilience was the strongest predictor. Kale's Epsilon grade rating was favorable, but psychology was not armor against the things that moved in the deep warp. I prepared contingency protocols. If Kale did not return within 31 months, 2 years plus 3 months acceptable variance, he would be declared lost. His genetic material, stored in house archives, would be released for potential future cloning or gene splicing projects. His quarters would be reassigned. His name would be added to the memorial wall, where House Delarum recorded navigators lost in service. I had processed 47 such additions in my 16 years of administrative service. Each one required the same documentation. Each one followed the same protocol. They blurred together in my records, differentiated only by names and dates, and specific causes of loss where known. Kale would not blur. I recognized this with absolute clarity. If he did not return, something would be removed from my existence that could not be replaced by efficiency or function. I did not examine why this was true. Analysis of my own emotional responses served no purpose. The departure day arrived. House protocol required administrative staff to witness departures for high-profile contracts. I stood in the shuttle bay among the other functionaries as Kale boarded the transport that would carry him to the Inquisitor's vessel. He wore the formal robes of a navigator on assignment, black and silver. The silk binding across his third eye was fresh, inscribed with prayers to the Emperor for safe passage through the darkness. He saw me in the crowd. Our eyes met. He raised one hand. Small gesture easily missed. Acknowledgement. Farewell. Promise of return or acceptance of loss. I could not determine which. The shuttle departed at 0847 hours local time. I logged it in my records and returned to my office. Work continued. I processed contracts for the remaining 16 active navigators. I coordinated with Imperial authorities on schedule conflicts. I managed disputes and payment verification and liability assessment. The rhythm of administrative function filled the hours that would otherwise contain awareness of absence. 3 months passed. 6 months. 1 year. Communications from the Ghoul Stars were sporadic, delayed by warp current interference and the vast distances involved. I received 2 confirmation signals indicating the Inquisitor's mission remained active. No details. No casualty reports. The silence meant either success or total loss. The distinction would not be clear until the mission's expected return window. I was 32 years old when my brother Cassian's third eye began to fail. He was 41, a senior navigator with 73 successful transits. The failure was gradual. First, a loss of depth perception in warp space, then increasing difficulty maintaining focus on the Astronomican's light. The house medical staff performed extensive evaluation. Genetic degradation, they determined. Rare but not unprecedented. His navigator capability would continue declining until he could no longer safely pilot. They retired him from active service. He moved from the navigator quarters to the administrative wing. Level 9, one level below mine. I encountered him in the corridor 3 days after his reassignment. He looked diminished. Not physically. His augmented physiology remained robust, but something essential had been removed. Purpose. Identity. The thing that had defined his existence for 28 years. They tell me you manage contracts now, he said. That you're efficient, valuable in your way. I perform my function adequately. Your way, your function, he laughed, sharp and bitter. I'm one of you now, the failed ones. Do you have tasks for failed navigators? Some useful purpose we can serve? The House is discussing options for your reassignment. Your experience and knowledge retain value. Value. Everything is value. Quantified. Calculated. He moved closer. Tell me something. When you were 15 and they told you that you would never manifest, that you would spend your life managing paperwork while others did the work you were born for, how did you bear it? I considered the question. It deserved an accurate answer. I did not bear it. I said. I accepted it. The distinction is significant. Accepted that you were useless. Accepted that I was not what I was intended to be, and determined what function I could serve instead. And that's enough. For centuries of existence, administrative function, it is what exists. Enough is not a relevant assessment. He stared at me for a long moment. I don't know if you're the sanest person in this house or the most damaged. The categories are not mutually exclusive. He left. I did not see him again for several months. Later I learned he had requested assignment to a remote house facility on an agri-world, managing genetic screening operations far from the ships and the void he could no longer navigate. The House approved the transfer. Efficient use of a degraded asset. 16 months after Kale's departure, I received notification of a navigator casualty. Navigator Sarah, the woman who would have been assigned to the Ghoul Star's mission if Kale had refused, had been lost during a routine transit through the Scarus sector. Warp phenomena, sudden and catastrophic. The ship had emerged without its navigator. The captain's report described her last moments, screaming about eyes in the darkness, about something that had seen her seeing it. She had torn away her silk binding, opened her third eye fully, and stopped screaming. They found her body in the navigator sanctum, empty. Not dead, empty. The flesh remained functional, breathing, heart beating. But nothing lived behind her eyes. They maintained her body for 7 weeks, hoping consciousness might return. It did not. They declared her lost and terminated life support. I processed the casualty documentation, added her name to the memorial wall, calculated the impact on House Navigator capacity, and began recruitment coordination to replace the loss. Sarah's psychological evaluation had been Delta grade, insufficient stability for the Ghoul Star's mission. If she had gone instead of Kale, she would have died there. Instead, she died in the Scarus sector, a region rated 17% casualty rate. Random chance. Warp phenomena were not predictable with perfect accuracy. But Kale had been right. She had died, just not in the way or place we had calculated. I ran the probability assessments again that night, alone in my quarters. If Kale had refused, Sarah would have gone to the Ghoul Stars, 70 to 1.4% chance of death. Instead, she went to Scarus, 17% casualty rate over career span, specific mission rating 6.3%. She had died anyway. Had Kale's acceptance changed anything? He had taken the high-risk mission with 44.2% survival probability. Sarah had taken standard missions with lower risk and died regardless. The math suggested Kale's choice had been strategically meaningless. Both navigators would die or survive according to factors beyond ethical calculation. But he did not know she would die elsewhere. He made his choice based on the information available. He accepted probable death to give someone else better odds. I could not determine if this was noble or merely statistically naive. 23 months after departure, I received the signal. The Inquisitor's vessel had emerged from the warp at the system's edge. Mission complete. Requesting approach clearance and Navigator retrieval. I processed the clearance request, logged the arrival time, began preparation of the completion documentation and payment verification protocols. Standard procedure. My hands were shaking. Autonomic response. Stress manifestation. Inefficient. I forced them still and continued working. The Inquisitor's vessel docked 6 hours later. I was not required to attend the arrival. My function was administrative, not ceremonial. But I monitored the dock security feeds from my office cogitator. I watched the airlock cycle, watched the crew disembark, counted them against the departure manifest. 73 crew departed. 41 returned. Kale emerged last. He walked slowly, carefully, like a man relearning how his legs functioned. The silk binding across his forehead was stained, not with blood, but with something else, something that left dark patterns in the fabric. His robes were clean but hung differently on his frame. He had lost weight, significant muscular atrophy visible even through the formal clothing. But he was alive. The house medical staff met him at the dock. Standard protocol for navigators returning from extended high-risk assignments. They would conduct comprehensive physical and psychological evaluation, 48 hours minimum. I would not be permitted contact during that period. I watched the feed until they escorted him into the medical wing. Then I returned to processing the mission completion documentation. 4 days later, he came to my office. He looked better than he had at arrival. The medical staff had administered restorative treatments, corrected the atrophy, stabilized whatever warp exposure damage had occurred. But something in his eyes was different, distant, as though part of him remained in the ghoul stars, watching things that could not be unwitnessed. Your completion documentation was perfect, he said. The Inquisitor was impressed with House Stellarum's administrative efficiency. That is my function. Your function. He sat in the chair across from my desk without being invited. Breach of protocol, administrative staff did not socialize with navigators. But I did not correct him. I need to tell you what I saw. Mission details are classified. You are not authorized to share them with administrative staff. I know. I'm telling you anyway. I should have refused. Should have reminded him of security protocols and information compartmentalization. I did not. I saw ships in the warp, he said. Not lost ships, hunting ships. Vessels crewed by things that used to be human. They pursue living ships, trying to catch them, trying to pull them into the depths. I watched them take a transport. 700 souls. The transport's navigator tried to break free, but they had already hooked into his consciousness. They showed him things he couldn't stop seeing. He screamed for 16 hours before his heart stopped from the strain. He spoke in the flat tone of someone reading from a casualty report. Clinical. Detached, the way I spoke about everything. We lost 19 crew members during the mission. 8 to warp phenomena. 4 to entity attack. 7 to psychological breakdown. They couldn't endure what they were seeing anymore and terminated themselves. The ship's confessor tried to help them, tried to strengthen their faith. It didn't matter. Some things are too large for faith. You survived, I said. I did. Do you want to know how? I did not answer. He continued regardless. I survived because I learned to stop caring. Not about the mission. I maintained focus on navigation, on keeping the ship moving, on getting the crew through. But I stopped caring about what I saw in the darkness. Stopped trying to understand it, or fight it, or pray against it. I just observed, recorded, processed. The way you process contracts. He looked at me directly. The way you've processed your entire existence. Clinical observation. Emotional distance. I used to think that was damage. Something broken in you. Now I understand it was adaptation. You learn to survive in a place where caring costs too much. I learned the same thing. I became you. That's how I survived. I had no response prepared for this. No protocol covered a navigator telling you that he survived hell by learning to imitate your coping mechanisms. I'm glad you survived, I said finally. Do you actually feel gladness? Or do you just recognize that my survival represents a positive outcome for house logistics? I don't know. The distinction is unclear. He laughed. Quiet, sad sound. At least you're honest. He stood to leave, paused at the door in the pattern I had learned to recognize. They're putting me back in the rotation after 6 weeks recovery. Standard protocol for extended missions. The psych evaluation said I'm fit for service. Epsilon grade rating maintained. That is favorable. Is it? I'm not sure anymore. But I'm functional. That's sufficient. Isn't that what you said? Function is sufficient? I said enough is not a relevant assessment. Function is what exists. What exists? He left. I sat in my office and attempted to process what had occurred. Kale had returned transformed, hollowed, capable but diminished. He had learned survival through emotional suppression, through clinical observation, through the techniques I had developed over decades of managing my own failure. He had survived by becoming like me. I could not determine if I should feel responsible for this. Could not determine if learning from my example had saved him or damaged him in ways the medical evaluation could not measure. I returned to work. I processed 17 contracts that day. Each one received appropriate attention and documentation. My efficiency rating remained optimal. I was 33 years old. I would live for another 167 years, minimum. I had learned to survive my existence by not fully living it. By processing experience as data, maintaining distance, serving function without attachment, Kale had learned the same technique in 2 years of horror. And it had saved him. I did not know if this meant I had discovered wisdom or merely developed an elaborate method of dying slowly. The distinction seemed increasingly irrelevant. Work continued. Years accumulated. I processed contracts, managed logistics, coordinated the movements of navigators who witnessed the wonders and horrors I would never see. My efficiency improved marginally year over year. Small optimizations in procedure, refined prediction algorithms, better pattern recognition in contract negotiation. I was 37 when Meridian married. The ceremony was elaborate, attended by 3 allied navigator houses. Her husband was Navigator's Prime of House Corvidae, a prestigious match. Their genetic compatibility had been verified extensively. Probability of viable Navigator offspring, 80 to 7.3%. I attended because my presence was required. Genetic descendant of House Stellarum, even failed ones, added to the ceremonial headcount that demonstrated house strength and continuity. Meridian looked magnificent in her ceremonial robes. The silk binding across her third eye was embroidered with both house symbols, Stellarum and Corvidae united. She radiated success, genetic value, fulfilled purpose. She did not speak to me during the ceremony or the celebration afterward. We existed in different categories: successful navigator and genetic dead end. No interaction was required or expected. I left early. No one noticed. 3 years later, Meridian's first child manifested at age 7, exceptional early development. The genetic combination had produced superior results. House Stellarum's reputation for quality bloodlines was reinforced. Meridian received formal commendation and increased her own genetic value rating. I processed the documentation recording her success, added it to House archives, continued my work. I was 42 years old when Kale came to my office and asked me an unexpected question. "Do you ever want to leave?" I looked up from the contract I was reviewing. "Leave where?" "Here. House Stellarum, the Imperium, all of it. Do you ever want to just stop?" "I am house property. Genetic investment. Leaving is not authorized." "That's not what I asked." I considered the question carefully. Want is not a relevant assessment. I exist within the structure that contains me. Speculation about alternative existences serves no function. You've perfected it, he said. Complete emotional disengagement. I've been trying for 6 years, since the Ghoul Stars, and I still have moments where I feel something. Anger, sadness, whatever. You don't, do you? You've eliminated it entirely. I have not eliminated emotion. I have categorized it as background process. It exists, but does not interfere with function. Teach me. Teach you what? How to finish what the Ghoul Stars started. How to function without the weight of caring. You've lived this way for decades. I've only managed it partially. I need to know how you maintain it. I looked at him. Cale was 43 years old. He had completed 68 successful transits since returning from the Ghoul Stars. 0 losses. His efficiency ratings remained optimal, but something in his expression suggested structural fatigue. Degradation not in capability, but in will. Why do you need this? I asked. Because I have another 80 years of service minimum. Maybe more if the Juvenat treatments continue working. I can't carry feeling for 80 years. It's too heavy. You don't carry it. I want to know how. I stopped carrying it because I had no choice. I failed. I could not be what I was designed to be. I adapted to failure. You succeeded. You are a functional navigator. Your situation is not comparable. My situation is exactly comparable. I'm functional. I perform my purpose. But I'm not what I was supposed to be either. I was supposed to be someone who could witness the warp and maintain humanity, faith, connection to something beyond duty. I lost all of that in the Ghoul Stars. I'm a tool now, a functional tool, like you. Teach me how to accept it. I had never taught anyone anything. My function was administrative, solitary. But Cale had spoken truth. We had become comparable. 2 tools serving their functions, maintaining their existences, carrying the weight of their continued operation. You eliminate points of attachment, I said. You do not form connections that create obligation or expectation. You process experience as data rather than event. You identify your function and perfect it, allowing function to replace identity. You exist in continuous present, neither hoping for future change nor regretting past loss. You maintain awareness that you are a component in a system vastly larger than yourself, and that component failure or success is ultimately irrelevant to system continuation. He listened with complete focus. How long did it take you to achieve this? Approximately 15 years. Full implementation occurred gradually. Teach me faster. Acceleration requires deliberate action. You must identify remaining emotional attachments and systematically eliminate them. How? I had never articulated this explicitly, had never needed to, but the answer was clear. Start attending events that celebrate others' success. Stop maintaining friendships or social connections beyond professional necessity. Stop consuming entertainment or art that produces emotional response. Stop hoping that your circumstances will change. Stop believing that your suffering or your survival matters beyond its utility to the system you serve. That's not survival. That's just slow death. The categories are not mutually exclusive. I survived by implementing these protocols. You asked how. I am telling you. Thank you, he said finally. That's the most honest thing anyone has ever told me. He left. I sat in my office and felt something that might have been regret attempting to surface from background process. I had just provided another person with instructions for emotional suicide. I had codified my own adaptation to failure as though it were wisdom worth sharing. But he had asked. He had recognized that I possessed a survival technique he needed. I had answered accurately. Function is what exists. Enough is not a relevant assessment. I returned to work. Years continued their accumulation. I processed contracts. Cale continued navigating. We spoke occasionally. Brief, professional exchanges that contain no unnecessary elements. He was implementing the protocols I had described. I could observe the changes in his effect, his speech patterns, his presence. He was becoming more efficient, more distant, more like me. I had created him in my image. Not intentionally, he had requested the instruction, but I bore responsibility for providing it. I could not determine if this constituted harm or help. The distinction seemed to matter, but I had no framework for measuring it. I was 49 years old when the administrative census required updated House Stellarum genetic records. Standard procedure, conducted every 20 years. I processed the documentation for all House members, including myself. Status: genetic retention, administrative function. Age: 49 standard years. Estimated life expectancy: 153 additional years. Genetic material: archived, viable, available for potential breeding program applications, pending House authorization. Marital status: unmarried, no authorization for external genetic transfer. Offspring: none, none authorized, none projected. Current function: senior contract administrator, manages 47% of House Navigator contracts. Efficiency rating: optimal. Performance reviews: satisfactory across all assessment periods. Recommendations: continue current assignment. I read the summary and recognized that it described my entire existence. 49 years reduced to genetic status, function designation, and efficiency metrics. Everything that defined me could be contained in 132 words. It was accurate, complete, sufficient, and it would remain essentially unchanged for the next 153 years. I archived the documentation and continued working. I was 53 years old when Kale received his 1,000th transit commendation. Exceptional achievement. Only 17 navigators in House Stellarum's 4,000-year history had reached 1,000 successful transits. The House matriarch held a formal ceremony. Kale was awarded the Seal of Perfect Navigation, a platinum medallion bearing the House symbol. I processed the commendation documentation. I did not attend the ceremony. Kale came to my office 3 days later. He wore the medallion on his robes. Physical symbol of achievement, value, success, 1,000 transits, he said. Do you know what that means? It means you have successfully navigated 1,000 warp journeys without loss. It represents exceptional capability and value to House Stellarum. It means I've spent 1,000 separate journeys staring into hell and guiding ships through it. 1,000 times opening my third eye and seeing things that should not exist. 1,000 successful transitions between the nightmare and reality. He touched the medallion. They gave me this. It's platinum, worth approximately 3,000 throne gilt in raw materials. Do you know what I would trade it for? I did not answer. Nothing. Because there's nothing I want. You taught me that. Want is not a relevant assessment. I exist within the structure that contains me. I have achieved perfect function. Just like you. He set something on my desk. I brought you something. It was another data crystal, like the one he had given me 22 years earlier, containing the recording of the warp. What is this? The same thing I gave you before. Updated recordings. Different phenomena. Different horrors. Same fundamental reality. I thought you might want to see what 1,000 transits looks like. Why would you think I want this? Because you watched the first recording 7 times. I checked the crystal's access log when you returned it. You studied something you could never experience, trying to understand it. I thought you might still want to understand. He was wrong. I had stopped wanting to understand years ago. Understanding served no function. It did not change my circumstances or enhance my capability. But I took the crystal. Thank you, I said. You're welcome. I think that's the last gift I'll ever give anyone. I've eliminated most remaining attachments. Professional relationships only. Emotional distance maintained. Just like you taught me. It's efficient. Sustainable. Perfect. He left. I placed the crystal in my desk drawer. I did not watch it. Not that day or the days after. It remained there, inert, containing visions of the impossible that I had trained myself to stop desiring. 18 months later, I received notification of Navigator casualty. Navigator's Kale Stellarum, age 55 standard years. Lost during transit through the veiled sector. Warp phenomena. Catastrophic. The ship had emerged without its navigator. The captain's report was brief. Navigator Stellarum maintained focus during extreme turbulence, guided ship through increasingly hostile conditions. Warp entity manifested in navigation sanctum. Navigator attempted to continue guidance despite entity presence. Entity consumed Navigator consciousness. Time of death, 23:47 hours ship time. Navigator Stellarum's final recorded words. Course holding. Continue thrust. I am maintaining. Transmission ended. He had died performing his function. Perfect to the last moment. I processed the casualty documentation, added his name to the memorial wall, calculated the impact on House Navigator capacity, began recruitment coordination protocols, standard procedure. That night, I returned to my quarters and retrieved the data crystal from my desk. I inserted it into my data slate, activated playback. The recordings showed warp transits from across Kale's career. Early journeys showed relatively calm Empyrean conditions, still horrifying, still magnificent, but manageable. Later recordings showed increasing turbulence, more dangerous phenomena, entities moving closer to the ships he guided. The final recording was dated 3 weeks before his death. The warp in that recording was chaos. Not the structured chaos I had seen in earlier recordings, but fundamental disorder. Reality itself was failing, dissolving, screaming. And through that nightmare, I could see the path Kale had found. A thread of stability, impossibly narrow, leading through the horror. His voice was audible on the recording. Calm, clinical, professional, maintaining course. Adjusting for lateral warp drift. Entity presence detected at bearing 270. Not engaging. Continuing navigation. Estimated emergence in 47 minutes. The recording ended. The ship had emerged successfully. Kale had guided them through impossible conditions with perfect precision. 3 weeks later, the same precision had not been enough. I watched all the recordings, 17 hours of accumulated warp footage. I watched them consecutively, without pause, letting the madness fill my perception until I could barely remember what real space looked like. I was trying to understand what Kale had experienced, what he had survived for 34 years, what had finally consumed him. I failed. Understanding was impossible. I could see the recordings, but I could not feel what a navigator felt when their third eye opened and exposed their consciousness to that horror. I could observe but never experience. Always outside, always distant, always reduced to processing second-hand data. Kale had taught himself to function the way I functioned. Clinical observation, emotional distance, perfect efficiency. And it had sustained him through 1,000 transits. And then it had failed. Or perhaps it had not failed. Perhaps he had simply encountered something that exceeded even perfect efficiency. Perhaps the universe contained horrors that could not be survived through adaptation, only endured until they consumed you. I did not know which interpretation was correct. I archived the recordings, returned to work, processed the next contract. I was 54 years old. I would live for approximately 148 more years. I would process perhaps 35,000 additional contracts. I would witness the loss of perhaps 90 more navigators, each death requiring the same documentation, the same protocols, the same clinical distance. Kale's death would not blur with the others. I recognized this with absolute clarity. He had been the person who saw me, who recognized that my survival technique was not defeat, but adaptation. Who asked me to teach him, and whom I taught, and who died maintaining the perfect function I had shown him how to achieve. I had created him in my image, and he had died perfectly efficient, perfectly detached, perfectly alone. I could not determine if I bore responsibility for this. Could not determine if my instruction had saved him for 34 years or killed him by teaching him to suppress the human responses that might have warned him to stop, to refuse assignments, to choose survival over function. The distinction seemed to matter, but I had no framework for measuring it. Function is what exists. Enough is not a relevant assessment. I continued working.